So you must issue all of your 1099s to your contractors and people you paid before January 31st. Okay. So January 31st is your deadline. February 1st, the penalties start. And the penalties are per 1099 that you should have issued but did not. And the longer you go without having filed those, the more the penalties increase. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello. Happy late January. Today, I want to bring you an episode on one of those things that really haunts those of us who work for ourselves, which is issuing 1099s. So the rule is pretty simple. If you paid anyone who was not an employee, if you paid them for your business, so not personal stuff, but just business, over $600 cumulatively throughout the year, then you must issue them a 1099. Okay. So this is really important to understand the basic rule. It's also really important to understand why it exists and that penalties start the day after the deadline. So you must issue all of your 1099s to your contractors and people you paid before January 31st. Okay. So January 31st is your deadline. February 1st, the penalties start. And the penalties are per 1099 that you should have issued but did not. And the longer you go without having filed those, the more the penalties increase. So let's just back up for a minute and talk philosophically about 1099s. And then I want to get real practical with you and tell you who does need a 1099, who does not need a 1099, and how to get it done. All right. So why does this exist? Well, the fact is there's a thing in the country called the tax gap. The tax gap is the difference between the amount of income, the amount of taxes that are owed to the US government versus the amount that is actually collected. Okay. And that gap, one of the big buckets that account for that gap is unreported income. And so one of the most notorious sources of unreported income is contractors, people who work on contract, people who earn small amounts of money through gig work. Ladies and gentlemen, that's us. So the IRS, and this is rightful, right? This is how the laws work in our system. If you don't like them, of course, I hope you're out there, advocating, but I'm all for fair tax law that we all follow. The rule exists because the IRS wants to basically increase the reporting on as much income as possible to make it less possible to not report that income. Right? The compliance rate of people who get a W-2 is super high. The reporting is super high because people who have a W-2, like one copy comes to them, one copy goes to the IRS, like done and done. The IRS already knows what you made. There's no wiggle room, right? So 1099s are similar. And when you issue them, you are actually technically issuing one copy to the contractor and one copy is going to the IRS. So super important to know that the IRS has copies of all the 1099s that you issue and of the ones that you receive, right? Two-way street. And the IRS, it's serious about this. Its job is to collect taxes, and that's a rightful thing. You might not love it, of course, when you're on the wrong side of it, but it's an important function of our country. So one of the ways that they are trying to increase the reporting of previously unreported income is by making the penalties for not filing 1099s that are due stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. Okay. So be warned that in 2025, just a couple weeks ago, the penalties for non-filing of a 1099 that you are supposed to file just went up from last year. Okay. If you're curious, if you're up to 30 days late, the penalty is $60 per 1099. If you are 31 days late, so past March 1st, then it's $130. So they more than double the fines at that point per 1099. After August, it triples almost up to $330 per return not filed. And then if the IRS discovers intentional disregard, then the penalty goes all the way up to $660 per non-filed 1099. So this is serious. You have to do it. Your deadline is the 31st of January, and here I am to help you get it done. All right. So let's jump in. First of all, there are multiple forms in the 1099 series, a whole ton of different names of forms, and they all are 1099 dash something, and they exist for slightly different reasons. And I'm not going to get into all the various ones that there are. You may receive some for interest, and that's called a 1099 INT. There's others. The ones we're going to talk about here today primarily are going to be the 1099 NEC, which stands for non-employee compensation, and the 1099K. I don't know what the K stands for, but the 1099K is a 1099 that is reported to you from a third-party payment processor. Okay. So the 1099s you are going to be issuing are going to be primarily a 1099 NEC. All right. To your non-employee contractors, to your non-employees for compensation paid. Okay. You may have also heard of the 1099 MISC, which stands for miscellaneous. These still exist, and there are a few little reasons that you might end up filing one of those, primarily to issue to a lawyer. And not in all cases, even then. But mostly the thing you're going to be worrying about is the 1099 NEC. Okay. So here are the basic rules. And just know for the record that I'm going to just call these 1099s from now on. I'm not going to keep saying 1099 NEC, but where it's important to make a distinction, I will. All right. The basic rules are this. You need to file a 1099 for any contractor that you paid $600 or more over the course of the calendar year. So here we're talking about calendar year 2024. And this is for work they did for your business. Okay. So it's not personal. So if I, go to the same hairdresser every time and I paid them over $600 for the year, that's personal, right? I don't owe the 1099 to my hairdresser. But if I paid a product photographer, if I paid for headshots, if I paid a website designer, if I paid a virtual assistant, on and on and on, those people, yes, for sure, I do owe a 1099 to them if they're contract and not an employee. You should know that one copy of the 1099 is going to the IRS. One copy is going to the contractor. That is part of the issuing process. And they're due by January 31st. Okay. And of course, if that date falls on a weekend, then it'll be due the Monday after. Penalties and interest begin to accrue the day after the deadline. Of course, that's how deadlines work. But there are some exceptions to who you need to issue a 1099 to. And so I want to read off the exceptions. They can get a little tricky. I'm going to be honest. So take some notes. All right. You don't need to issue a 1099 to someone if you paid them by credit or debit card. Why is that? That's because what's actually happening when you pay someone through a credit or debit card is that credit or debit card company is the third-party payment processor, and they then become responsible for issuing the 1099 because the transaction went through them. So they will issue a 1099K, and you don't have to worry about that. That is not your job. That is their job. Okay. Another reason you don't need to issue a 1099 is if you paid them through PayPal Business, Cash App Business, Venmo Business, etc. So the business goods and services version of a third-party payment processor like PayPal, okay? It's actually really important that when you are conducting business, you do it through a business app, that you call it goods and services. 1099s are the primary reason why. First of all, if you don't, you're probably violating the terms and services of the company that you're working through. So there's that. But also, what you're doing when you pay through goods and services through the business side of PayPal versus friends and family is you're making it PayPal's job to issue the 1099. So you're making your accounting horrible and annoying if you use friends and family, because now you're on the hook for filing 1099s for all those people that you paid. So congratulations. Yeah, so I just advocate that I mean, obviously follow the law, follow the terms and conditions, issue your 1099s, and use the business side when it's proper to do so, because in part, you're making your accounting much simpler. Okay. All right. And the third reason that you do not need to issue a 1099 is if that party is structured as either an S corporation or a C corporation. Okay. Very important to know. Now, hang on. We're going to get to how you know the answers to that question, because I know you might not know, right? You might hire me to give a tax workshop to your organization, and you might think, oh, Hannah Cole, I'm gonna give her a 1099. Well, actually, you don't and should not issue a 1099 to me if I come and give a tax workshop for your university or professional development organization, because Sunlight Tax is an S corporation. And when I fill out a W-9 and I send it to you because your accounting department asked for it, they're going to see on that W-9 that it says I've marked S corporation. And if they're following the tax rules, that means that W-9 becomes their proof that they were not supposed to or required to issue a 1099 to me. I'm going to tell you honestly that most organizations that hire me to speak, and there are a lot, I do a lot of speaking, don't actually get this rule right, and they issue me 1099s that they're not supposed to. So that's actually kind of annoying for me. I have to reconcile it every year on my tax return. And no matter how many places I clarify, like, hey, I'm a tax person, I know the rules, and you do not have to issue me a 1099, and this W-9 is your proof of that, they still do it. And frankly, it's because the person who's hiring me is usually nowhere near the accounting department. The accounting department wasn't listening to that, isn't really paying a lot of attention, doesn't frankly care, and just does it anyway, right? So you might get 1099s if you're an S Corp like me, and it's annoying, and you have a little fancy footwork to do on your tax return because of it. But the thing that you should know is that if you are paying someone who is structured as an S Corp or a C Corp, you don't owe them a 1099. And the way that you determine that they're an S Corp or a C Corp is you ask them. You ask them to fill out this piece of paperwork called the W-9, and that will show you on a legal document how they have structured themselves. And so that's your proof that you don't need to if the IRS should ever come and say, oh, hey, why didn't you issue this 1099? You do need to issue a 1099 to any attorney that you pay for services rendered to your business. Keep in mind that this is not for personal, right? So if you, I don't know, sue your neighbor, I don't know what you would do personally with an attorney, but maybe something like that. I suppose a real estate lawyer, right, for your personal residence. That is an attorney who you're going to pay that for a personal purpose. You don't owe them a 1099, but if they do work for your business, then you do owe them a 1099, okay? The rules for attorneys are a little weird and a little different from everybody else, okay? So just take note, these are the attorney rules right here. These don't apply to anyone who's not an attorney. So you do need to issue a 1099 to an attorney when you pay them by cash or check or Venmo or Zelle, whatever. You do not need to issue them a 1099 if you pay them with a debit, credit card, PayPal, business, etc. So that is an exception. But the attorney's corporate structure has no effect on whether you issue them a 1099 or not. So an attorney that is incorporated that is a C Corp or an S Corp, you do issue a 1099 to. So note that is quite different from non-attorneys. I also want to note this little tiny detail that gross proceeds that you pay to an attorney or law firm connected with a legal settlement are reported on a Form 1099 MISC, Box 10, just FYI, okay? But all other payments to attorneys or law firms for services provided to you are reported on a 1099 NEC. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference. You might have a 1099 MISC if it was over a legal settlement. Okay. All right, next, rent. So rent payments for your business do go on a Form 1099 MISC, not a Form 1099 NEC. Okay. So it counts in that miscellaneous category, not non-employee income. And you only are going to issue a 1099 for rent to your landlord if it's for a business purpose. Okay, so this would be true for an office space, studio space, warehouse, etc. You do not issue a 1099 to your landlord, even if you have a home office or home studio. Okay, and the reason there is that that home office, home studio, the primary purpose of your rent is the home, right? The studio is too small of a factor here. Okay. Keep in mind when we're talking about issuing a 1099 to a landlord, keep in mind that they may easily fall under one of those exception categories. In fact, are pretty likely to. So did you pay them through credit or debit card, through a third-party payment processor? Then you don't owe them a 1099. Also, are they structured as an S corporation or a C corporation? Many landlords will be, and you want to make sure you ask. You can have them fill out a W-9 for you and get that answer in writing. And that will be the proof that you need, that you don't need to issue a 1099 to your landlord. Okay. All right. Now, ACH transfers. So an ACH transfer is generally like paying someone with cash or check, and it means that you do need to issue a 1099 to someone you pay through an ACH transfer. But a weird little exception is that if you do use an ACH transfer through a third-party payment processor, like the ACH function through PayPal Business, that counts in the third-party payment bucket, and you don't need to issue a 1099. Okay. All right. And lastly, I do want to just mention that you may have heard a lot of news about 1099K reporting. There's been some changes to the thresholds that of 1099K reporting from third-party payment processors. First and foremost, I just want to say, like, this isn't really your problem. You're not ever going to issue a 1099K because you are not a third-party payment processor. So this is really only going to speak to payments you receive, reporting that you will receive from PayPal Business or your credit card company. But what I just want you to understand there legally is that third-party payment processors for a long time had a much higher threshold for reporting. They didn't have to report if they had fewer than 200 transactions or $20,000 of income. And the IRS is trying to get that threshold to match up with the 1099 NEC threshold of $600. And I just want you to know that the trend over time is going to be getting that 1099K threshold down and down and down and down until it matches the same $600 threshold of the 1099 NEC. And every year there's some news stories about, PayPal fighting back, or Stripe and Square fighting back and hating this rule. It's coming. It's coming. They've managed to get it delayed a year or two there. I believe that for this year, the threshold is now down to $5,000 for reporting or one transaction, but it's headed to $600. And just FYI, even though there's a lot of kicking and screaming and the federal government has allowed for some delay here, a lot of the states just went ahead and said, nope, we don't make any exception for you. You have to comply with this rule. We're going to make our state threshold $600. So even though the federal threshold is a little higher, a lot of states, more than half of them, are requiring 1099Ks to be issued to you for a much lower threshold. So what I'm really saying here is you're probably going to get some 1099Ks. And if you used to not get them because your income wasn't high enough through that processor, that might not be a reason anymore. That reasoning is going to change. Okay. But you don't really have to worry about it too much. I'm just explaining to you kind of what's going on behind the scenes. All right. So let me give you a little action checklist that you can take away and you can get this done. All right. So the first and most important thing you want to know and you want to do is you want to, before you even send a payment to someone, you want to have that person fill out a W-9 and send it to you. Okay. Understand that a W-9 is information. It's an information gathering form. It's free. You can just grab a blank one off the IRS website and send it to somebody. So easy. But be careful when you receive it back. It has sensitive information on it, like somebody's social security number, and it may also have bank ACH information as well. So you do not want to email around a filled out W-9. That's something to treat securely. You want to upload it to a secure server. You could even pop it in the mail with a stamp on it. That is secure. So you want to be careful how you send those when they're filled out. But you want to ask anybody that you pay to fill out a W-9 for you. And what that does is it basically covers your butt. It gathers the information you are going to need in order to issue that person a 1099. Or if you're not required to issue them a 1099, it's going to be the proof that you're not required, right? Because it's going to have the box checked for, oh, I'm an S corporation, right? So you're going to have that piece of proof if the IRS were ever to ask why you didn't issue a 1099. Okay. So that's your best practice. Get a W-9 from anybody that you plan to pay, and ideally get it back from them before you pay them. Use it as your leverage. Take notes from any larger organization you've ever worked for. Usually, if you do some contract work for a university or a large nonprofit, like, you are not getting paid until you return that W-9. So you can behave that way as well. And I recommend it. It's there for good reason. The next thing you want to do to successfully issue all your 1099s is get your bookkeeping done. So one of the things you need to know is who you made payments to and in what amount. Who did you pay over $600 to? You want a list of all the people that you paid over $600 through the course of 2024, okay? So once you have that list, now you're going to go through that list and look at all these exceptions that I have listed in this podcast, and you're going to start crossing people off. Okay, I paid that one by credit card, that one by credit card, etc. Right? And you're going to see, and what you're doing is whittling that list down to a smaller list of the people you actually really do need to issue a 1099 to. Okay? If you never got a W-9 in the first place, now's the time. It will be harder to do after you've paid them because the person doesn't necessarily have any incentive anymore to give you one, but you need it. So you want to beg, you want to beg them for a W-9, and you can blame me here. I know that there's, people in the world who are like, really don't want you to issue them a 1099 because they don't want to report the income. Listen, that's not your problem. Your legal obligation is to issue the 1099. You got to do it. Just tell them that Sunlight Tax said you had to do it. And remember that you can grab a W-9 for free that's blank off the IRS website. Just Google IRS W-9. And so that's a really easy thing to do. It's just, you can email a link to that blank W-9 to anybody who you need one back from. And if you want, you could pop on the phone and get their social security number, for example, over the phone. That's quick and that's relatively secure. And you can write that down without having to transmit that sensitive information over email. All right. So I hope that explainer about why you need to issue 1099s, who you need to issue them to, who you don't need to issue them to, and then your action checklist for how to get it all done. I hope that has helped you today. Remember that deadline is coming right up. It's on January 31st. And good luck getting it done. See you next time. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.